What is up, everybody? It is your boy Dreadcast, aka Chris. Welcome back to the channel. And part two of intro to Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel 101. This is episode two. I know it's been a while. I apologize for that. I work. I also had a couple of personal things going on recently, so I haven't been able to find the time. But now is the perfect time for part two because part two we're going to go over a lot today. I am going to try not to make it as long as it was um, the other day, um, the first one, excuse me, and it's probably not going to happen because we have a lot to go over. And why it's the perfect time? There's actually a update happening right now on Master Duel, so you can't even log in. That's why I'm doing it this way on my PC. Um, and a whole new bunch of things are going to come out. 2 new selection packs, a secret pack, and there's going to be almost the complete archetype slash deck of a deck that has been dominant in the TCG, in the trading card game, the actual physical card game, for months now. One of the top decks, if not the pretty much the top deck for months now, is coming out on Master Duel. So it might change the game. It might be a game changer. So now is the time, if you are a new player to the game or a returning player, to jump in. And this is for you guys. This is not for veterans or anybody like that. This is for people who don't, who want to get involved and play Yu-Gi-Oh! It is free, Master Duel, so that's cool. So you could just jump right in. But as we know, the barrier entry is, uh, very, very tough. It is not an easy game to get into, especially right now in the current format, the current meta, etc. So I'm going to be, straight up honest with you guys, straightforward, and I'm going to let you know what's real, what's not, and how I feel about things, etc. Also, to preface this, keep in mind that I am not an expert. I don't claim to be, but I have been playing for a good while now. I know Master Duel pretty well. I know the mechanics pretty well. I know the standards of everything pretty well. So that's why this is for people who really don't know much. And, I'm not going to be going into super advanced theories here. This is for people who are looking to get their foot in the door. And is it an easy game? No. Is it um, a fun game? Absolutely. Can be absolutely exciting, fun, and gratifying at many times, especially when you're climbing the ladder on competitive. As you get more competitive, it gets to be more fun. Sometimes it can be extremely frustrating, though, and so be wary of that. The biggest hurdle is the beginning when you're learning. Once you start building decks and you're making multiple decks, it's fun. Building decks is fun. Playing the game is fun. Learning about the game is fun. Just watching videos about the game is fun. I do that all the time. So in this video, um, part two, and if you haven't seen part one, please go back and please like, subscribe, um, you know, comment on that video, and join this channel. I really appreciate it. I'm looking to grow it, and the more you guys support me, the more I will do, the harder I'll work to make this work for you guys. Because to be honest with you, there's really just not a lot out there for you new players. Konami doesn't do the greatest job, to be honest, in teaching young players or new players how to, learn the game and get their foot in the door. So that's why I'm here. The first episode is up on the channel. That is Dread_cast. DREAD_CAST. Simple. And that's pretty much my name across the board on all my different social media platforms. Twitch, I stream on Twitch. You can watch me play there, etc. Twitter. But if you're new and you haven't watched the first episode, please watch that first before you watch this, because in that episode we went over the basically the basics, the base of the game. Spell cards, trap cards, monster cards. Those are your three main types of cards in Yu-Gi-Oh. Uh, and I went into detail about the types of monsters there are, the types of spells, and the types of traps. Basically, that was the whole first episode. So if you want to learn about that first, watch that, come back, watch this, and we'll get into it. But this is going to be a little bit more advanced. So as you can see here, I have Intro to Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel 101 Episode 2. This is the breakdown of what we're going to be doing today. And advanced card analytics, because we're going to continue the card analytics. We didn't get into the extra deck. We didn't get into the monster types, or like going over a card and understanding what everything on a card means. We're going to get into that. As you see here, staples, which are basically generic cards and not archetypal cards, which I'll get into about archetypes as well. But staples are cards that are usually played by the majority of players in most decks. They can be used in almost all decks. These are important cards that you definitely want to craft, and I'll get into that as well, crafting and everything later. But these are cards that you want to have in your decks. So they're called staples. Then there's hand traps, which are also, a lot of them are staples, and we'll get into that and more, as you can see. That'll be first. That won't be too long, hopefully, because this is more about card analytics again. Gameplay mechanics, the flow state of a match, phases, what you can do, etc. I went over phases in the first episode, but I'm gonna go into a little bit more here. I might do this at the end though, because I kind of want to do this on Master Duel itself and show you and actually play a game and do a little bit of a tutorial. So this might be like an episode 3 type thing, but I just wanted to bring it up here. It might be something I cover a little bit. So that'll be really short too. Where it's going to get a little longer is Master Duel interface will be the other thing. Either the second or third part that we do here, where everything is. Basically, I'm going to show you on Master Duel where to go, what you need to know, like gems, crafting points, all the things you need to know when you're getting started playing Master Duel when you jump into the actual game. Then, finally, deck building. This is what you really need to know. Where to start. How do you choose your starting deck? How do you build your starting deck? All that good stuff. So, without further ado, let's get into it. And as always, thank you guys for coming in. So, advanced card analytics. First, I'm going to show you here. This is MasterDuelMeta.com. I think this is shout out to Decade, DKAY, DKAYED is the name of his channel. He's on YouTube. He's huge. He's won 2 world championships on Duel Links in like 2015, 2017, I believe. And he pretty much runs this thing, and he gives out the leaks. He's got all these connections. It's a really great place to go here, and shout out to him for that, because it really does help tremendously. Like, when I say tremendously, I mean tremendously, to have this site. You should be on this site as a new player, and this is a great way to look at things like deck builds, just everything. Look, if you look here, right, you got your tier list, so that'll tell you like all the top decks. Top decks is just like literally every deck. It'll show you how many people are playing them, how well they're doing in tournaments, secret packs, leaks and updates. All this stuff is part of the Master Duel part, like when I get into the Master Duel stuff. But what I would do if I was you go into, because when you're building a deck, that's what you're going to want to do. This is all the new upcoming stuff that you might want to know. I know it looks like a lot, but let's click on top decks just to show you. But we'll get into this in the other part. You see, he has a whole, and you have last 2 weeks, last 7 days, current format, last 4 weeks, etc. You got tournament decks, spicy decks, free to play. So those are your cheaper decks, banless, legal, Master 1, which is the top competitive spot you could be in. You make Master 1, you are a really good player. I mean, you're one of the top players. That's a tough place to be. The highest I've ever made is Master 5. So I've made it to Master, which is very difficult to do, but I haven't made it past Master 5. These are just some of the, I guess, newer decks that people are playing, newer builds, I guess. Because you have to understand that. So these are all these are all relevant decks at this point. That people are playing they're posting on the site and everything. You'll see numbers next to them, like this 55 Telemans deck. It says new because it means there's new cards in it probably. But there's all different types of builds of these decks, and I recommend very highly to look at these things and look at these builds. Not everyone's builds are the same. Some of them add spicy cards to their decks. We call spicy cards basically cards that aren't the standard to be played in a certain deck or archetype or engine, which I'll get into those words, those buzzwords and stuff. And then you have, just going down the list, how many of these, the more popular decks can be played more. They're at the top. These are the better decks usually. Not always the case. Like 8Axis Blind is not a popular deck, but it seems like there's 6 decks on here that people have played. So, this doesn't tell you everything, but it gives you such a great idea of all the decks that are out there. And it's really good to know the top decks, like the top 10, 15, 20 decks, because that's what you're going to be running into the most, especially as you climb the ladder and get higher and higher in the, in Master Duel, in the competitive scene. So, I'm sorry, my charger is not working the greatest right now for my PC. All right, so that's just that. But what we're going to do is we're going to talk about cards right now. So you click there, you could search any card you want. This is based on popularity. So these are the most popular cards in the game right now. Okay, Master Duel, that is. Mind you, this is all Master Duel. Very different from TCG. And very different in a lot of ways. So this is not for TCG players. If you want to learn TCG stuff, I suggest, there's other channels out there. There's other outlets that you can go to find information on that. You know what I mean? So, please charge. So, this is just Master Duel. Now, as you could see here, the most popular card is called Max C. Okay? Why I'm going to use this card is for many reasons, but like I said, first I want to go over what a card entails, because I didn't really do this in the first episode. I just went over the cards in general and the basics about them, right? And so annoying, this thing. So here's a card, right? This is Maxi. And as you could see here, it says the name. Now, if you look at where the description is, not the card itself, it has the name at the top, Max C. All the way to the right of that, you see it says Earth, and there's a symbol for Earth, a Japanese symbol for Earth. The symbol doesn't really matter that much. Just know that that's Earth. Earth is an attribute, okay? Yes. Earth. Wait a minute. I'm sorry. Yeah. Earth is an attribute, okay? There are 6 attributes in Yu-Gi-Oh! Just 6. There's Earth, there's Fire, there's Wind, there's Dark, there's Light, and then there's Water. Okay, so Earth, Fire, Water, the elements, pretty much those 3, and then you have Wind. So like 4 elements. It's like the last Airbender. Earth, Wind, Fire, Water. Earth, Wind, and Fire, if that helps. And then you have Light and Dark. Okay, so those are the 6 attributes, and they could be important in certain scenarios depending on what you're playing. But it's just good to know. This is very basic stuff. I'm not going to go too far into it, but just know that there are 6 attributes of cards. So this is an Earth-based monster. It's a monster, as you could tell. And watch my last video. I said monsters have a specific color, so that's how you know they're monsters. Spells are green, traps are purple. Monsters could be all different colors depending if they're extra deck or main deck or not. Watch the last episode if you really want to know more. Then you see a 2 next to the Earth. 2 with the star means level 2. On the card itself, you'll just see 2 stars, meaning level 2. It's a level 2 monster. And Once again, like I said in the first episode, go back to it if you want to watch it. The levels determine if you can normal summon that monster without tributing or not, basically. Levels 1 through 4, you can normal summon without tributing. Um, Levels 5 and 6, you need to tribute one monster in order to normal summon that monster. And levels 7 to 12, which is 7 or higher, 12 is the highest, you need to tribute 2 monsters to normal summon a monster like that. So that's how it works in generalities. All right, so you got the attribute, you got the level, you got the name, and then underneath where it says Maxi there, it says in parentheses, it says insect/effect. So, and on the card you'll see it says it right underneath the picture, insect/effect. So it's an insect type monster. Okay, that's the type of monster it is. Okay, type is very different from archetype. So there are, I think, 32, maybe more, maybe a little less, somewhere around there, 32 different types of monsters, I believe. Okay, there's all different types. This is an insect. This is a zombie. This is a dragon. This is a fiend. You get the picture, right? So there's all different types. There's not really too much more you need to know about that. It could have an effect in game, but a lot of times it really doesn't. But it can, because it depends on the deck you play. A lot of things are niche, but it's just good to know that there are all these different types. And I wouldn't recommend. I know some people, like when I first started, I said, "Oh, I want to play like a machine type deck or something." Like I think I wanted to play like a dragon. I don't know, something like that, something cool. But it's like that's not really how it works. There is actually a really good dragon type deck called Dragon Link. But generally, you're building a deck based on the archetype, not on what the type is. You understand what I'm saying? Um, Give me 1 second, guys. I'm sorry. Okay. So, yes, there are all different types of monsters. Now, we unpack that. Then you have some text, which is right underneath the insect effect. Now, by the way, the effect part, as I said in the first video, there are effect monsters in the main deck. And we discussed this. There's 40 to 6. You can play as little as 40 and as much as 60. So between 40 and 60 cards in your main deck. And effect monsters, which means they do some sort of effect, are this darker orangish color. Normal monsters, which it would say normal or something like that on the card. It'll have text as well, but it'll be like flavor text. It wouldn't be like actual important text. We call them vanilla monsters. There's not too many of them that people play, and if they do, it's for a specific purpose. So normally you're going to see effect monsters 90+% of the time. So that's how that goes. So there you have the text. We'll read the text in a second. Then you have all the way at the bottom of the card the attack and the defense. As you see, the attack is 500, the defense is 200 for this card. That's what you need to know about that. Real quickly about attack and defense is when you normal summon a monster, it's automatically in attack position, which is face up and right side up. That's attack position. So when you attack, okay, you're using those attack points to do the damage to your opponent. Now, each player starts with 8,000 life points. Okay, so both me and you, let's say, are playing, and we start with 8,000 life points each. So the goal is to get the person, obviously, to 0 life points. Pretty simple, right? And so That's the attack. When you attack and there's another monster on the field that your opponent has, let's say, this is how it works. If your opponent's monster, let's say, just for purposes of this right now, Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring is another staple hand trap. By the way, we're going to talk about staple hand traps. These are bolt staple hand traps, by the way. And this is another monster. So let's say you have Max C. This is just for an example. This will never happen, but let's say you have Max C in attack position and your opponent has Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring in attack position. And as you can see, Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring has 0 attack and 1800 defense. So if you were to attack, that means both cards are, by the way, right side up, face up. If you were to attack into Ash Blossom with Max C, and if there's a monster on the field, by the way, on your opponent's side, and you attack, you have to attack either, let's say they just have the one monster, you have to attack that one monster. If they have multiple monsters, you can choose which monster you want to attack. So it's not like Magic the Gathering, where, basically, I don't remember exactly how Magic works, but I'm pretty sure like every monster has to attack another monster. It's like lined up in a certain way. In this game, you have to attack. You can choose which monster you want to attack. Okay, so if there's like 3 monsters on the board, you can choose the easiest one or the weakest one to get over. If you can't get over one, obviously you don't attack that one. But if your opponent only has one monster on the field, you have to attack that one, unless the card specifically says it can attack directly. Attacking directly means you can attack directly for the actual opponent's life points. And obviously, if there's no monsters on your opponent's field, you can attack directly because he has nothing to block you, right? But in this scenario, you attack with the 500 attack of Max C into the 0 attack of Ash Blossom. This is what would happen. Ash Blossom would obviously get destroyed, go to the graveyard, and the 500 attack that Max C has would go through, it would all go through and hit the opponent's life points because this monster has 0 attack. So it's attack versus attack, okay? And that 500, because Ash Blossom has 0 attack, that 500 damage, we call it damage, that 500 damage is going to go through, not only kill the Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring and send it to the graveyard, but it's also going to minus 500 life points from the opponent. So that's how that works. Now, if this, let's say, had 500 life points, 500 attack points, and this has 500, then they'd crash into each other, they'd both get destroyed, and no damage would go through, obviously. But let's say this was in defense position, which defense position could be face up, but tapped. In Magic the Gathering terms, tapped, but sideways. Basically, it would be like this instead of like this, right? It would be like that. It could also be in defense position face down. When a monster card is face down, it's always in defense position. Always. That's how it works. So if a monster were to attack, let's say this card, Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring with the Max C, okay, whether it's in defense position face up or defense position face down, doesn't matter. You still have to go through its defense. So it's in defense position. Because I said this in the last video, you can normal summon a monster, you could special summon monsters, but you could also set monsters, which counts as a normal summon. When you set a monster, setting a monster, they'd be face down and sideways. So they'd be in defense position. It's a good way to like defend sometimes if you're in a pinch. It's not a good spot to be in if you're doing that, but sometimes it's necessary just to block incoming damage, right? But okay, let's say this thing was in face-up defense position, for instance, and you were to attack with Max C. Well, your 500 attack is much lower than Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring's 1800 defense. So what would happen? Well, you would hit the Ash Blossom. And what actually happens is, I'm pretty I don't know why I can't remember this right now, but I'm pretty sure neither. I, I could be wrong. I feel like the attacking monster would get killed, would get destroyed because he's overwhelmed, but he might not. All I know is that the defense position monster would obviously eat up the damage. No damage would go through. Even if, let's say, this 500 attack, let's say Ash Blossom had 0 defense and you were to attack into her, you would destroy her just like you would if you attacked her when she was in attack position, but none of that damage would go through. That's the major difference. That's what you really need to know. When you attack with something that's in attack position, the damage will go through based on the difference between your attack and the opponent's monster's attack. That extra damage goes through. If your opponent's monster is in defense position, it doesn't matter if it has 0 defense or 3,000 defense. None of that damage is going through. It doesn't matter how much more attack damage you have compared to their defense, that is not going through. That's why it's defense. It blocks it. But because let's say she had 0 defense, she would get destroyed. The card would get destroyed. But let's say in this situation, it has way more defense than the attack of Max C. Because of that, she wouldn't get destroyed. She'd block all the damage, and I believe Max C would get destroyed. So I'm sorry that I can't remember this right now. I don't know why. Maybe I'm a little burnt, but I'm pretty sure that it would get destroyed. And that's how that works. Defense and attack. Obviously, if 2 cards are both in defense, they can't do anything. You can only attack with your attack damage. There are, certain circumstances, there are specific situations where this is not the case. There are exceptions to the rule, and just remember that there's always going to be exceptions to every rule that we go over. Just keep that in the back of your head. Remember that it's not always the case, but everything I'm saying here is pretty much 99%, 95% of the case, of the time. All right, so there you go. That's that. Attack, defense. Then it says how to obtain the card in the master pack, most used in these decks. That doesn't matter. You'll see on the bottom also says TCG and OCG. This card is completely banned. If you see that circle with the X, obviously it means completely banned in the TCG. In the OCG, you can play 3 of them. In Master Duel, you can play 3 of them. This is considered the most broken card in Yugioh. That's why it's banned in TCG. Master Duel Reddit is littered with posts and just forums and stuff about how this card is broken and needs to go away, etc., etc. And I'll explain why. We'll talk about this card because we're going to talk about hand traps, and this is a hand trap, and staples, and etc., stuff like that. But I want to we went over the monster types. We pretty much went over everything I wanted to talk about here, right? What else did I want to say? Monster types, extra deck. We'll get into the extra deck too. Okay. So let's just go right into the hand traps and staples. Let's make this quick. So Max C. Why is it the most broken card? So this card says on its text, and you might be looking at it and say, how is this card good? It's 500 attack, 200 defense. This card stinks, right? No. So we don't use these cards, which we call hand traps. Remember that. Ash Blossom and Joy Spring is also a hand trap. And these are the 2 most popular cards in the game, obviously, you see. I think over 90+% people play this card. And I think they play it at 3, too. Because remember, you can play every card at 3 unless it otherwise says. Unless it's banned or, as you can see, like this says 1. That means you can only play 1 of it. So you'll see what's banned, what's semi-limited, and what's limited. And that's how it works. This would be considered limited because it's a 1. If it was a 2, it's called semi-limited. At full capacity, it's at 3. So this card says, during either player's turn, okay? during either player's turn, you can send this card from your hand to the graveyard, semicolon. These are things I'm going to have to get into another video, but these colons and semicolon things are important. They decipher between activation and when your opponent can respond. So, for instance, during either player's turn is the condition, basically. Basically when you can do it. So, during either player's turn. The activation of this card is you can send this card from your hand to the graveyard, semicolon. Now, at that point, that means that once you send it from your hand to the graveyard, before it does its actual effect, your opponent can respond in order to stop this card, right? Because everybody always has a chance to respond to something, to stop something from resolving. Okay, because what happens is there's a card is activated, and maybe the part you can send this card from your hand to the graveyard, that's like the activation. But that doesn't mean the effect is going to go off. Okay, because it can be stopped. After the activation is what the actual effect is. And once it goes through past the activation into the effect then resolves. And once it's resolved, it's applied, right? That's how this works. That's how cards work. But so you could send this card from your hand to the graveyard. That's the activation. And then the result is this turn, each time your opponent special summons a monster or monsters, immediately draw one card. And then the last sentence says you can only use one max C in parentheses per turn, meaning if you have two of these cards in your hand, you can only use one of them that turn. You cannot use the second one. Okay? A lot of cards say this, especially really good cards like this. But there are cards that don't say this as well, a lot. So we'll get into that. But why is this so broken? Well, it's a hand trap, meaning you can play this directly from your hand, and it's essentially a trap. So how you play this normally is, if there's a great going second card, because if you're going second, your opponent's going first, you can play this at any time, any point in time. Okay? It's a quick effect, even though it doesn't say it on this card particularly, it'll say it on the Ash Blossom card. See, on the Ash Blossom card, it says quick effect in parentheses. If you read the text there, it says quick effect. This is also a quick effect. You could play this at any time as a response to anything. Okay? Which in Master Duel you have to be careful, because you have to, I don't want to get into it, but there's certain ways you could be able to use this at any point in time. And if you keep it on auto, then you can't. So I'll explain that later, but when we get into the Master Duel stuff. But basically, you can use this whenever. Some people in today's world, there are aspects where people will just play this right away in the draw phase because they want to avoid certain cards that can be activated from this being played on the main phase. It's complicated. I really don't want to get into that, but basically, you can use this at any time. And normally, the best time to use it is you want to basically react to your opponent trying to special summon a monster, and then use it so that you're guaranteed a draw, right? Because if you respond to your opponent trying to special summon a monster with this, you're gonna get the draw, okay? But why this is so good is that each time your opponent special summons a monster. Now, like I said in the first video, you can only normal summon a monster once per turn. Obviously, there's exceptions to the rule, but 99% of the time, you can only normal summon once per turn. After that normal summon, all other monsters that you summon have to be special summoned. And special summoning monsters from your main deck requires conditions. For instance, a card might say, you can special summon this card from your hand if you control no monsters. So, like, if you control no monsters, you could special summon this card from your hand. That's the effect. There's an activation and effect. You could stop that too. but just like this. But that's how that works. Um, but special summoning can be done, like I said in the last video, over and over and over again in a turn. And with the way the meta is in Yu-Gi-Oh right now, which we'll get into the types of decks also as well in a little while, there are essentially three different, well, two major different types of decks, and then there's everything in between. On one end of the spectrum, you have what's called combo decks. Combo decks are basically very aggressive, highly offensive, very efficient decks that use comboing, meaning they use a lot of little monsters and monsters that they keep special summoning from their deck or from their hand, etc. And they'll use spells and stuff to do that as well. Basically, they'll try to gain resources and then combo off into their bigger extra deck monsters, because that's how this game works. Basically, the extra deck are your like boss monsters, and then they'll keep doing this until they build a board that's sufficient enough for them to stop you on your turn when they're going first. Let's say that's like the whole thing. Comboing means there's going to be a lot of crazy things going on, and they're going to be special summoning a lot of monsters. That's what a combo deck really does. On the opposite end of the spectrum, you have control decks. Control decks, basically, like they say, are looking to control the board, control everything pretty much as they can. And control decks usually don't special summon a lot of monsters. They usually have fewer monsters. A lot of them come from the main deck. A lot of these control decks don't even use the extra deck at all. And their whole deck is based around stopping the opponent using things like traps and spells and things like that. So it's sort of the opposite of a combo deck. And then you have like everything in between. Like a mid-range deck would be something that does both, right? So we'll get into that later, but for now, it is what it is. So then you have why is this so cracked? So this is cracked because a lot of the top decks, most of the top decks, tier 1 decks especially right now, okay, like Tearlaments is the best, if not the best deck, one of the best decks. Sprite, Dragon Link, even branded Despia, things like that. They special summon a lot. Most decks special summon a lot, unless it's a very heavy control deck, which you don't see a lot of heavy control decks because that's sort of anti-meta, right? That stops the combo decks. It's supposed to be anti-meta, right? So that means Maxi is so good because you're probably going to be able. This effect will be useful against almost every deck except for a few. And not only that, it's a continuous hand trap, meaning it's not a one-off thing. For that entire turn, if this card resolves, every time your opponent special summons a monster, you draw one card. In Yu-Gi-Oh, one of the biggest things to do in Yu-Gi-Oh is drawing cards. Being able to get card advantage is the whole game. Resource management and being able to have card advantage over your opponent is basically how you win games, in a nutshell. And Maxi is broken for that reason, because if you're going second, you hit him with Maxi, it resolves. Now, if your opponent's playing a really crazy combo deck, which is highly likely, then they're going to have to make a choice. They could do one of two things. They could either basically try to build a small board, which is going to be not even close to full capacity. They could try to, send out a couple of monsters that are decently strong, maybe set a couple of spells and traps and whatever, and then pass turn. So they build a weak board because they don't want you drawing a ton of cards. Because then if you do, basically you'll have everything at your disposal and you'll be able to do whatever you want and play through everything, and it would be a disaster for them. Because the whole thing about Yu-Gi-Oh is when you go first, most decks want to go first. Why? Because obviously it's an advantage. You get to just build your board up. Now, the one thing when going first is you can't battle, obviously, because that would be totally unfair. I mean, that would be just absolutely ridiculous. So you can't battle. You can just build your board, and then you got to pass your turn. And you only get 5 cards when you open, going first. Going second, you open with a 5-card hand, but you also get that draw. So you get a 6 card when it's your turn, going second. But the only way to really stop your opponent from building their board when they're going first is by using hand traps. And this is why these cards are the best, are like the most used cards. Because hand traps allow you to basically minimize your opponent's board as much as possible, so that when you go, there's not too much of an opposition for you to go against. Because if your opponent's just able to build their board at will, they're going to build some crazy boards. This is what happens. They're going to have 3 or 4 monsters on the field, 2 or 3 traps. They're going to have like 7, 8 cards on the board, and they're just going to be able to like negate things that you do, destroy your cards, negate your monster effects, just banish cards. They're going to be able to do so many things that stop you, and you don't want that, right? And I'll talk about the other going second cards besides the hand traps. There are what's called board breakers that are usually going second cards, but you can't. They're not hand traps. You can't use them on your opponent's turn. You have to wait till your turn to use them. So those are the 2 different types of cards that you can play that can, negatively impact your opponent when they go first. So this card is broken, like I said, because then you could just draw forever. The way these cards combo off and special summon so many monsters, you could end up realistically drawing into a 10, 12, 13 card hand if your opponent's stupid and they just decide, okay, you know what? I got max seed. I don't care. I'm just going to build my board to its full capacity anyway. That's the wrong decision. That never works out, because then your opponent's just going to draw so many cards that when they go, they're just going to be able to just play through all your interruptions and just, destroy your cards. They might have a board breaker too, or 2 of them, and it's a disaster. That's why Max C is so broken, because it basically stops your opponent in his tracks from building the board they want to build. So they're going to build a much weaker board than normal, and that's why this card's broken. So pretty much everyone plays this at 3, even though the general rule of thumb is you really don't want to play a card at 3 that is a card that is a hard once per turn. We call this a hard once per turn because it says you can only use 1 max C per turn. It's saying you can only use this specific card once per turn. You cannot use it again till the next turn. So you don't want to see 2 copies of this in your hand, really. Although this particular card, it's actually not the worst thing in the world, because even if you do see 2 copies, you can use it again on the next turn and draw cards again, because a lot of decks these days, they also play cards and summon monsters and special summon on the opponent's turn. You'll see that from a lot of the top decks. So Max C can be useful like that. That's why everyone plays it. So that's a hand trap, essentially. It's something that you can play at any point in time, pretty much, as a response to anything. I don't want to get into the super details of that, but basically, it's a great way to stop your opponent when going second. It's a great going second card. Now, Ash Blossom enjoys spring. Let's look at this card. By the way, if you look at the top there, we'll get into the crafting points in a little bit, but crafting points are what you use to, you can make any cards you want in Yu-Gi-Oh! You can make any deck you want, any cards you want, as long as you have the crafting points to do so. And if you see all the way at the top of the card, it says "You are" in this like purplish blue color around it, right? It's on the top right of the card. This is an ultra rare, meaning it's the highest rarity. There are 4 rarities of cards. There's ultra rare, which is the highest, which are the hardest to build and get, but they're worth it if they're staples like this. And you need, I'll explain that later, but ultra rare, then there's special rares. So here's a special rare. See, it says SR with the orange color. A lot easier to make special rares than it is ultra rare. Ultra rares are very difficult to make. Special rares, not very difficult to make, but you do want to be careful. You don't want to just willy-nilly make special rares, because you could run out of those craft points. And then there's, let's see if we can find everything special rare or ultra rare at the top. Look at this. It's a joke. Oh, here we go. But Tealman's card, that's a 2 of, is a normal. This is a normal card. That's the lowest rarity. The N with the gray, lowest rarity, and you're going to have so many of these craft points, it doesn't matter. You can make as many normals as you want infinitely, basically. Same goes for rare. Rare is the second. There's a rare. It's an R with the blue, as you can see right there. That's a rare. So normals and rares, you don't have to worry about it at all. Special rare, I would definitely be careful, but you'll definitely have crafting points for that. But ultra rare, very difficult to make. All right, so let's talk about Ash Blossom. Ash Blossom, as you can see, Ash Blossom enjoys spring, it's called. It's a monster. It's an effect monster. It's a zombie effect tuner. I don't want to talk about tuners right now. We'll talk about that another time, but tuner. Talk about that when we talk about the extra deck. And it's a fire, as you can see on the top right, a fire level 3. Okay? But once again, these cards aren't used as monsters. They're hand traps. Okay? This is another hand trap. So don't worry about anything. Basically, all that matters about this card is what it says on the card, the description. That's how hand traps work. So just like Maxi, you can play this at any point in time as a response to something else. The thing is, Maxi you can play whenever you want because it's like a lingering effect. You could just play it, and for that whole turn, any monsters your opponent special summons, you draw cards off of it. That's just how it works. This is more specific. So this is like a one-off hand trap. This is a hand trap this is like one of the best generic hand traps in the game that almost everyone plays as well. And the reason why for that too is Ash Blossom actually stops Maxi, which is really funny. That's why a lot of people play it, because you definitely want to try to stop Maxi. And that's why people complain about Maxi. It kind of like creates this format and this meta where like you got to play Maxi at 3, you got to play Ash Blossom, and then you got to play a few other cards like this card, Called by the Grave. They're all cards that revolve around Maxi being in everyone's deck. So it's kind of annoying, and I get it. But Ash Blossom says, when a card or effect, so any card or effect, is activated that includes any of these effects, any of the following effects, meaning quick effect. So the first part of the sentence is the condition, basically. Like I said before a colon, it's usually just like what condition needs to be met for you to activate this card. So in order for you to activate this card, when a card or effect is activated that includes any of these effects, so it has to include one of the below effects. Quick effect, meaning you can use it at any point in time. You could just use it right from your hand, boom, and do whatever effect it does. Now, here comes the activation. You can discard this card. There's the activation, semicolon. This is where your opponent can respond and try to stop it. But if he doesn't, boom, we go into the effect. Negate that effect. Now, I know that sounds confusing because it's like, what did it do? Well, it says any of these effects, the 3 at the bottom, the 3 bullet points. Okay, so if any of these effects occur, if your opponent add a card from the deck to the hand. So if your opponent adds a card from their deck to the hand in any fashion, like, a lot of cards do this. This is how you gain card advantage and resources. People will play spells that add cards to the hand. They'll have monster effects that add cards to the hand. So any card that add a card from the deck to the hand, that includes drawing, by the way. Okay? So drawing cards. But not your initial draw in your draw phase. Your initial draw in your draw phase you always get. That can't be stopped. But any other extra drawing or adding, okay? If your opponent does that, or if your opponent special summons from the deck, or if your opponent sends a card from the deck to the graveyard. So basically, and let's just read the last sentence real quick. You can only use this effect of Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring once per turn. So once again, this is a hard once per turn card. You can only use it once in that turn. You can't use a second copy on something else in that turn. Now, what I mean by this is a one-off is that it only stops one card effect from happening, one thing from happening. Because it says when a card or effect is activated that includes any of these effects, those 3 bullet points, you can discard this card and negate that effect. You can negate it. You can stop it. So basically, you can stop any card that comes out of the deck, essentially. Because there's really not much more you can do coming out of the deck besides, you can draw cards from the deck, you can add cards from the deck, which is the same thing pretty much, and that covers the first bullet point. You can special summon monsters from the deck. That covers the second bullet point. And you can send cards from the deck to the graveyard. That covers the third bullet point. What else can really come out of the deck and go somewhere? The only other thing that actually bypasses this is if a card says, set a card from your deck to the field. So like if you set a trap from your deck to the field, it can't stop that. But that's very rare. It's going to stop mostly anything coming out of the deck. And that's why it's so good. It's generically very good. It stops most decks from doing what they want to do, but it's only a one-off. So you got to choose wisely when you use it. That's the whole strategy of Yu-Gi-Oh. So that's Ash Blossom Joy Spring, and that's a hand trap. So these are cards you can play on turn 0, meaning on your opponent's turn 1, you can play this from your hand. That's why a lot of people play these, because if you don't play these cards, your opponent's just going to be able to build their boards up and do whatever the hell they want. And then when you go, they're going to be able to stop you with all the cards that they set up on the field, essentially, right? All right, that's enough about hand traps and stuff like that. But these are what we call staples. So they're cards that everyone plays because they're super important to have. They're super important in every deck, and they're generic. They're good in every deck. Ash Blossom is good in every deck. Call by the Grave, which is not a hand trap because it's a spell. And if you watch my last videos, you'll remember that spells cannot be played from the hand on the opponent's turn. They can only be played from the hand on your own turn. So this is a great card going first because it actually stops Maxi and it stops Ash Blossom. You can only play 2 of them though, as you can see. This is a spell, so you can see it right there. It's a spell. It says it. It's green. On the top right, it says spell, and it says quick play. It's a quick play spell. We went over this in the first video. If you're not familiar. And the effect says, target 1 monster in your opponent's graveyard. That's the activation. Okay? So at this point, it can be stopped because you're just targeting. There's a semicolon. Remember, before the semicolon is the activation. That doesn't mean the effect goes through yet. It can be stopped at that point. But once it gets past the semicolon part, now the effect happens. Banish it. So you can target a monster in your opponent's graveyard, banish it, and if you do, until the end of the next turn, meaning the turn you do it and the turn after, its effects are negated, as well as the activated effects and the effects on the field of monsters with the same original name. So this card's ridiculous because, and you could tell it is because it's a 2 of in Master Duel, it's a 2 of in OCG, and it's a 1 of in TCG. You can only play 1 of it in TCG. How does this stop Maxi and Ash Blossom? Because you're probably like, wait, target 1 monster in your opponent's graveyard, banish it? Well, if you read these 2 cards, this card says you can send this card from the hand to the graveyard. So the activation part is it goes to the graveyard. So before its effect actually happens and resolves, Call by the Grave can actually banish it and negate it before its effect goes off. Same for Ash Blossom and Joy Strings, because Ash Blossom and Joy Strings says you can discard this card. Then that's the activation. Then Call by the Grave, you respond with it, you negate it, banish it, and its effect doesn't resolve. So that's how that works. Those are 3 of the biggest staples, obviously, the 3 most popular cards, as you can see right here. The rest of these, some of these are also hand traps, 1-ofs, but they're also monsters that you actually play that are big monsters that could come on the field. As you can see, 2,500 attack, a level 6 Dark Dragon monster. Okay, I don't want to go too much into this because we got a lot more to talk about, but I hope you get the gist of what I'm saying about understanding the card. The whole point of this was to understand the card, reading the card, understanding what a hand trap is and what a staple is. Because they don't really tell you these things in Master Duel. They won't tell you, oh, these are important cards, these are stable cards. No, you got to use these websites and you got to look these things up. You got to look at a lot of deck builds to see what they're using, and a lot of these decks will use these top cards, right? But staples are essentially, they're not just hand traps, but they're mostly hand traps, and they're mostly generic cards that are just very powerful.